We'll intervene whenever we decide it's in our national security interest to intervene. And if you don't like it, lump it.
The problem with America is not that we go around marauding around the world imposing ourselves. The problem with America in the last 10, 15 years since the end of the Cold War, really in the last 60 years, is that we've been too slow to get involved.
I don't know how many Iraqi civilians were killed, but I can assure you that the number is the absolute minimal that it's possible in modern warfare.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
You know, that land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
Welcome to the Darkened Hour.
Welcome to another episode of the Darkened Hour. I'm your host, Adam Fitzgerald, and with me today is two guests who I've known for quite some time, and I anticipated one day that they would be here, and it brings me great pleasure to introduce Sean Russell and Darin Harvey. And the both of you I've known through viral media for the last, I think, four years, approximately around 4 or 5 years. And I am very proud of the both of you for the changes that you've gone through and the evolution of you learning about so many various subjects. You're not a one-trick pony, and you cover so many subjects. And I'm very proud of the both of you of the work you've done and the podcast that you're making, which is called Beyond Ground Zero, which we'll talk about in a minute. And thank you both for very much for coming on.
Thank you for the kind words, Adam. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I wondered that we all have come from that background. Whether it was for the long term, for the short term, and used to have come from the background that I've come from, and most 9/11 researchers. And that is, we came from a fringe conspiracy mindset. And what I want for everybody to learn and know about the both of you is that, much like with everybody else, including myself and, our friend, co-researcher, Nelson from DJ Thermal Detonator and others that we know, that we once believed in various things. And what's unfortunate, and something that really grinds my gears, is that when we first started, the first thing that we came across on viral media were, very well-intentioned but misinformed films, like Loose Change, for example, or Davon Cleese in Plain Sight. But out of that, we changed our mindset, and we played devil's advocate with the evidence that we had. So, Sean, I want to start with you.
Sure.
When did you begin this journey of studying the events of September 11, 2001?
Well, it's a long time ago now. I've been interested in 9/11 since probably Michael Moore's documentary in the early 2000s. Was it 2004, I think? Fahrenheit 9/11 was a big media release. I think it won an award. It was very popular and made the rounds. And at the time, I didn't think very much at all really about 9/11, which I have a short story that I can get into regarding that. But it was a major media piece regarding 9/11 and maybe some things about 9/11 that are causing the public to start to look at things in a new way. And it was shortly after that, it might have been 2005, 2006, there was another pretty popular documentary that made the rounds in the public media sphere, which was Zeitgeist. And Zeitgeist didn't deal specifically with 9/11, but it had a chapter on 9/11. And it dealt with, I guess, sort of historical revisionism, for lack of a better descriptor. And 9/11 was one of the things that it got into. And so by that time, I watched that, and I was very moved by it. It definitely reinforced the sorts of, I guess, just thoughts and questions, unanswered questions that I had, and mostly just thoughts about 9/11. And it was at that point that I started looking a little bit more for more things about 9/11, and specifically a conspiracy about 9/11. And so that's where conspiracy theorism, conspiracy theory would have come into play for me in the early to mid 2000s. By some luck, by some random chance, it was soon after that that I came across some more intriguing 9/11 media on, I believe, YouTube, because it was in the early days of YouTube, and there was it was maybe easier to find some of the conspiracy theory work on 9/11. So probably sometime around the years 2009, 2010, 11, somewhere in there, I happened across a 9/11 conspiracy documentary called War by Deception. And it's one of the older 9/11 documentaries, but it's one of the better of the original slew of 9/11 documentaries, which there's a handful of them. But I didn't see the others. I wasn't aware of In Plain Sight. I wasn't aware of Loose Change. There was a lot of things that were definitely more popular that I missed just by chance. And it was that film War by Deception that really caught my attention, like really caught my attention. And it made me even more interested in asking new questions, different questions, and having new thoughts, different thoughts, and trying to find more information about those things. And that same film producer, Ryan Dawson, he created sort of a sequel to that film a couple of years later. Might have been 2016, something like that. And he made Empire Unmasked. And it's kind of a sequel to War by Deception, or almost an expanded version of it, which both films are very long films.
Right.
And so at the end of War by Deception, there's a sort of call to the carpet to the audience, to the viewer, to accept and embrace a obligation, a responsibility as the public, to become more informed, to become more capable, and to maybe make some action regarding a 9/11 investigation. And at the time, everybody was talking about change,
Right.
real change. And so that's what led me to reaching out through social media, which I did not really use at the time. So I started using Facebook and started basically internet outreach, trying to find other people who were talking about these matters, maybe learn from them or have discourse with them and learn myself. It was after watching those documentaries that then I opened all the doors, even the ones that I thought probably were dead ends, and I wanted to see it all. I wanted to see all the information that everybody would talk about. There was, at that time, in the sort of middle life of YouTube, still some of the channels that are no longer around today, still some of the channels in the old school 9/11 media that you could watch in those days. And so I started really watching the broadcasts, the interviews, the film productions, whatever was out there. And I learned about things like loose change, which I had missed at the time. And it was starting to add up for me. I didn't have a tremendous amount of opinion about 9/11 on the day or even the years following. But over time, I reviewed a lot of information. And ever since, I have spent probably half of my time acquiring information and easily half, maybe even more than half of my time removing information, throwing out red herrings. What I've come to understand is that there's a lot of junk in the infosphere, a lot of stuff that you can't really do anything with. But it's what I say to people today is there's some things that I don't think they quite go away. There's some things that you can't remove because it seems like they're facts. And it's those things that I try to work with today. And so, Adam, I met you and later Darin, basically on Facebook in the group 9/11 Truth for Grownups, which would have been about 2017, 2018. I became aware that the 9/11 Truth movement had some internal discourse, and certain people were basically getting pushed out of the movement because of their conflicting or heretical opinions. And it's not just opinion, because it is some things that really can be regarded as facts, but it's the groupthink, the popular opinion that some of these ideas were effectively heretical. And that inspired me even more to see what both sides of this equation were about and what this internal strife was about. So I joined 9/11 Truth for Grownups, and that's where I encountered Adam Fitzgerald and DJ Thermal Detonator. Later, I would meet Darin through Nelson Martin's DJ Thermal Detonator. And ever since about that time, I've been trying to prove anything that I thought I believed. And that involved a long process of evaluating information and sourcing information, basically trying to link back anything that I held as a belief and really scrutinizing it, weighing it out, and finding out if I still believed certain things about 9/11. That's where I am today. And I feel pretty confident about the information that I trust. And I'm trying to make it more available to anyone else who might be going through the same steps. And I think that if I can help any of those people who might be going through those same steps to perhaps advance faster, that's what I'm about today. And I can talk more about that later, but that's in a nutshell where I come from and where I'm at.
It's a long process, and it's something, Darin, that you went through, but you had a different experience involving yourself when you first started. So, Darin, for our audience, why 9/11, and what type of experience did you go through when you started?
Well, I was 18 when 9/11 happened, and I was a young kid. I didn't fully understand why we were being attacked on that day, but I knew I was scared. I was angry. Why this happened? Why all these innocent people had to die? So I kind of through that time went through school and college and just everyday life. Never thought about it. I was always under the impression about the official story. I believed it. I'm not saying the official story is 100% accurate, but most of it is. But I believe the whole official story. And I never got into conspiracies really until like 2016 is when my brother introduced me. My brother's a conspiracy theorist, and he showed me a video about 9/11, and It's the famous, I think his name is Mark Walsh, the Harley guy.
Yes, that's right. That's his name.
Yeah, yeah. He was talking about, the structure of the Twin Towers, but that wasn't it. There was a guy kind of like in a suit just hanging around him and like almost like seeing what he was trying to say, make sure he was saying the correct stuff to make sure the story went through. And he's like, look at that, look at that. And I'm like, it's kind of interesting, but I never thought anything like, the government would do this and that type of stuff. So I was like, I'll look into it and ever. So I started dabbling a little bit into it. Um, and then I would go on YouTube and type in 9/11 conspiracies, and then you would see people talking about the Flight 175, how it looks like it just goes right through the tower. People talking about the pod underneath Flight 175 and no planes, no hijackers. You can't make phone calls at that type of altitude, and so on. So I started thinking about it, I'm like, I don't know. I just can't see where there was no plane. We saw the planes hit, we saw the destruction. I don't know. So I started digging in 9/11 a little bit more, and I came across a guy named Christopher Bolin. And Christopher Bolin was probably the number one guy I followed. Got his books, read them thoroughly, read them a couple times actually. And I was like, this guy makes like this is crazy. And I started going back on stuff the Israelis and previous wars, like the 1967, the USS Liberty. Just went back to just other stuff with the King David Hotel and the Levant affair. And all this other stuff. I'm like, oh, it's interesting. It seems like they always want us to go to war for them and fight their battles. So I was like, that's interesting. And then I came across a film on YouTube by DJ Thermal Detonator about the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, and which I still consider the best film available. Even though it's about 93, but it's the best 9/11 film that you can go by. I stand by that 100%. It's one of the best films ever. I've seen it probably 7, 8 times. And he pointed out like Israeli involvement in 93. So as I'm reading Bolin and I'm learning about 93, because I'd never heard about 93. I was 11 years old. I don't remember anything about it, to be honest with you, until I saw the film. And they're talking about, Josie Hadass, Ahmadinejad, and so on. So I'm like, wow. So if they're involved in 93, they had to do 9/11, right? So I would promote Bolin's ideas. I would go on, Facebook or Twitter, and talk about how the Israelis did this and that. And then I came across you, and I saw your book review on Amazon about Christopher Bolin. And I was like, hey, I know this guy. This guy's on YouTube and Twitter. Like I've seen him before. And I read your review, and it really hit home to me. Because as I started thinking about it, I was like, yeah, this guy blames everyone from the janitor to housekeeper that's a Jewish person for 9/11. Like, I'm calling off like I'm anti-Semitic, and I don't like this. And I was like, I need to do more digging. So I started following you in your videos. And then I started interacting a lot with you and Nelson and DJ Thermal Detonator on YouTube, like the comments on YouTube and Twitter. And you guys made more sense because I saw an interview that Bolin did with James Perloff where he talked about no planes being used. There were military planes, and hijackers weren't there. It was all this other stuff about no hijackers, no planes. And he talked about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed being like an imposter at Gitmo. Like, no, this guy's crazy. I can't do this anymore. And so I actually threw away his book, got away from that, and I started following you and Nelson. And then Nelson invited me to a couple groups on Facebook. They're private groups, but I felt honored because there's only a certain amount of people in these groups. And then we started talking. He gave me all these things to do and to research and look at. And that's when I met Sean, and I met some other people as well who I continue to talk to this day. And man, it was a blessing. What a blessing. Because I went from a guy questioning if planes were being used to no hijackers to not knowing nothing about Arab terrorism, Islamic terrorism, radicalism, Wahhabism, Sunni, Shiite. not knowing any of that, and now learning it, and how 9/11 was just precursors, how there was red flags after red flags after red flags up to the event. Because 9/11 just didn't happen 9/11. Like it just didn't all of a sudden just come. Like this was planning, this was sophistication. So that's how I got to know you guys, and I'm so thankful because I was able to shed that that type of light I didn't want to be in, and to become good friends with you and Nelson, Sean, and others, and just interacting with people on Twitter and YouTube that see what we see. It's definitely a blessing.
Well, yeah, and thank you for the kind remarks. But I always saw as myself as somebody who gave somebody a little bit of a push, and the efforts belong with the both of you and anybody else for that matter. But it's interesting to note that very few people make that change, and it's unfortunate because you would like to see a more active and proactive, educated movement that can actually get things done. And when you talk about, as you mentioned, Darin, about no planes or hijackers, and it really defeats the purpose of why you would join the truth movement to begin with, because you want to hold, if you're trying to hold a a certain element of the government or the intelligence services accountable for 9/11 itself, well, you can't do that by proposing theories that don't have evidence or information that can prove that there was some type of criminality conducted by some element of the government. But Sean, going back to you, what specifically regarding 9/11 do you find illuminating? Because there's so many areas of that's relating to 9/11. Is it pre-intelligence operations? Is it radical fundamentalism, or is it something else? What really has your invested interest about 9/11?
Well, there's multiple ways that we look at 9/11. I think that's only fair to evaluate it from multiple angles, because it seems that there's multiple motivating factors. It's difficult to pin down just one specific thing. There's a sentiment out in the infosphere that there isn't one smoking gun regarding 9/11. I don't necessarily disagree with that. So there's a few different things to be considered. Probably the most inspiring thing that led me to spend real time and energy on 9/11 conspiracy theory and research and investigation, probably the one thing, because I think it was when I set out to find out, is this information accurate? And that's the story of urban moving systems. And so once I had heard about the reports regarding urban moving systems on 9/11, I made a little bit of effort, actually, instead of just trusting, say, YouTube videos or online posts to tell me what to believe. I read the reports. There's police and FBI reports which are available on, I think, Archive and other places where you can download these files, and they're heavily redacted, but you can read them. And I read them multiple times, and that was what got me, I guess, researching, because I was blown away by the reports and the story, and I thought it was just so interesting and really out there. I was shocked that basically this story caught me completely by surprise and off guard. I had no idea that I would ever encounter a story like that. And I wanted to know, is this true? And so that was where I began researching and reading and shifting away from just watching a film or just reposting someone's comments or just clicking like on something that floated across my media feed. because I needed to know if that's actually something that is factual, then that's very important for the way that I would be looking at all of this and this subject matter as a whole. And that would have been in probably the war by deception days in the early 2010s or late 2000s. In a way, I'm very lucky that I started to get serious about 9/11 truth or 9/11 conspiracy theory in that era after 2008 or so, because it was only by then that the reports about Ali al-Jarrah in Lebanon were being cycled in the media. And so I think I really got a leg up on 9/11 investigation because that information was known at the time, and I was able to bypass a lot of early 9/11 talk, which mostly encompassed talk about how buildings fell or how planes were suspicious. And I got to skip that. And I think I'm lucky in that regard.
Yeah, you saved yourself a lot of time. And, there's been, and I don't need to tell you both, because you both came across various individuals on viral media regarding their lengthy experience in the fringe aspects of 9/11. But Darin, you seem to have a vested interest with foreign Arab radicals and their seemingly connections, and their seemingly strange connections with the intelligence services, foreign and domestic. People like El Sayed Nosair or Abu Nidal and Ramzi Youssef. And you have written and helped a co-researcher, DJ Thermal Detonator, with articles about some of them. And you've done various videos on your channel about the brief histories of these people. And I just want for you to explain what made you take a special interest in understanding and learning about people like El Sayed Nosair and Abu Nidal, and why are they important for the public to understand who they are?
Well, I have to thank DJ Thermal Detonator for that. He's the one that got me to explore these type of figures like El Sayed Nosair, Abu Nidal, and Ramzi Youssef. It all stems back to 1993 World Trade Center bombing. We look at that as our possible 9/11. Okay, if it was done correctly, if they put the bomb under the right column, the one tower was the whole goal was for one tower to topple the other and cause mass casualties. Unfortunately, I'm great that didn't happen, but 93 definitely could have been 9/11 if it was done correctly. So we have to look at some of the players involved and their background. We know I'm not going to go into too much depth with Abu Nidal, but if you go back to Abu Nidal in 70s and 80s and hijackings and all the other stuff he's done, from bombings to assassinations, and his involvements and stuff where a certain intelligence agency would kind of just step aside and not really say anything. But let him do what he wanted to do with no repercussions. That's something that's very important. El Sayed Nosair is one of the guys I think gets overlooked the most, because I think the Blind Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman kind of gets more of the play than he does, because his notoriety and who he is, being the Blind Sheikh, and his popularity. Nosair, you got to think about it, came into the States in 81. I think that's very important. And where he came from not Al Qaeda camps where he trained at, right. To learn stuff like assassinations and bomb making and all that stuff. That's very important to know. As I point out in John Miller's book The Cell, where back into the mid to later 80s, how he was committing terrorist acts, and this is before any type of Islamic terrorism is on American soil. This is before the Blind Sheikh even comes in, years before. This is before, a lot of stuff. So with Nosair and trying to throw a bomb at Mikhail Gorbachev and trying to He tried to bomb a gay nightclub there in New York. These
Ah,
type of terrorist acts are very important to know because as he has this group involved of the conspirators in 1993, all the guys involved is they got together and went to a shooting range in Calverton, Long Island there, and the FBI was monitoring them. Why was the FBI monitoring them in '89 before the blind sheet came in, and there's no Islamic terrorism on American soil? So what I think is happening is they know what Nasir's doing, okay, and they know his background, and this is why they're monitoring him. And we know about Nasir, who committed, one of the first terrorist acts in American soil by assassinating Meir Rabbi Kahane, and that's very important to know too because his background, he formed a Jewish Defense League. He was a very prominent person around the world, and for him to assassinate him was, wasn't really Al Qaeda, as as we know. So Nasir is very important to the fact that when he got arrested, that he was still making decisions while in prison. He would have people visit him. He's talking about, hey, we need to kidnap some of these Jewish judges and senators who were involved in my case. I think Elvin Schlesinger was one. I know Al D'Amato was one, senator of New York. These guys were targeted for assassinations and kidnappings. He wanted to bomb 12 Jewish neighborhoods, okay, and bust them out of prison. And so this guy, even though he's in prison, Adam, he's still like this main character. This guy giving orders out. Like they look to him for advice. They look to him for guidance. And I find that so important to know. So that's why I took a liking to Nasir because I think he's a very prominent figure, especially where he came from and the training he did.
mm,
And the same thing with Ramzi Youssef, you know, how he came into the country, came with a fake Iraqi passport, decided to form this group, the cell, and they create a bomb and they used that to bomb the World Trade Center in 1993. Um, but his background is interesting too because who his uncle is, and that's excuse me, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who's his uncle, as we know, is who's been deemed the mastermind of 9/11. So, and then eventually too, what we can get to it is how they formed the Bojinka plot, which in our cases that we believe was the blueprint for 9/11. So, these are some very interesting characters, people that really the public just knows Osama bin Laden. Really, they really don't know these characters, their backgrounds, and why they did it because that's very important because we're told by the media that they hate our freedoms, and that's not the case. If you listen to Ramzi Youssef's case there when he got arrested, it was about foreign policy. Our support for Israel and the crimes they commit, and the crimes that the United States have committed, and how he called us butchers and hypocrites. And I think he went on for like almost an hour in his statement. So that's the thing. It wasn't about our freedoms. It was about our foreign policy, and that's something that as a 9/11 researcher and people who want to research 9/11 really need to look at is our foreign policy and how it affects our freedom here and our safety. Against terrorist organizations like Al Qaeda and PFLP and all these other ones that deemed us supporter of Israel when they're committing all those crimes over there in the Middle East.
yes. Sean, Darin brings up an interesting point regarding the greater geopolitical goals of certain terrorist events. And you've touched on this subject before regarding a change in the enemy as the United States perceives it. And when we were involved with the epic of the Cold War, for example, with the Soviet Union, we had, of course, the invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. And right around that same time, almost conveniently, you had a revolution of Islamists the takeover of the Grand Mosque seizure in Saudi Arabia, and also the Iranian Revolution that kicked out the previous Western-backed leader, Reza Pahlavi, known as the Shah of Iran. So much is going on, but in the process, it finally eliminates the worldview of Arab nationalism, something that I've covered before in my writings when I posted to Medium. And Sean, I know you touched on the subject because what we had was a replacement of an old enemy with a new in terms of radical Arab fundamentalism. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on just how important this period was of 1979 forward, and why should people look into this period and make a connection to 9/11? What would be your thoughts on that?
Well, you're correct, Adam, that 1979 is a very important pivotal year. There is a lot of reasons that I know you agree that it's a good enough place to start if you want to backtrack a little bit with something like 9/11 and evaluate the events prior, which could have accumulated to result in the events of September 11th. Regarding Arab nationalism, the Western imperial powers in the Cold War era were terrified of figures like Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, who could have been considered the most unifying force in the Middle East and North Africa since, some say, Muhammad Ali. And Nasser mortified the Western powers like the British, the French, the Americans, the Israelis. And this Arab nationalist movement, which was growing out of places in the Middle East, like Egypt, like Syria, movements like Baathism and other pan-Arabism, compared to what we know today, which is predominantly the religious motivating factor. But the Arab political movements at the time would have unified the Middle East and maybe even Africa for political and economic advantage to the people of those regions. And it appears in hindsight that the Western imperial powers did not like that in the slightest. And so for you to allude to the Cold War era, which is a series of podcasts on its own, but in short, it does appear in retrospect that the red threat of communism, to which we have still to this day an echo of the policy of containment, it appears that the red threat became the green menace, green being the color of the Prophet Muhammad, became the green menace in or about that year 1979. And there is a direct overlap with the policy of containment and the shifting of Western power, military and political, against the communist expansion towards directing military policy and, for lack of a better term, Western aggression against Islamism, which in its own right overtook Arab nationalism because of various revolutions. And all of this ties directly in with the movements, ideologies, and figures involved with everything in Egypt, from the assassination of Sadat forward into even the Middle East proper, into Afghanistan, later into Sudan and Africa, and the Arabian Peninsula, and groups such as Al-Qaeda, and events such as September 11th. So it's not an easy question to answer quickly, but I would agree with you, Adam, that it is something to consider and weigh out fairly and thoroughly.
Mhm.
Yes, I'm always somebody who believes that for every event in history, in order to go forwards, we have to go backwards, and to get a
Mhm.
better understanding of what each event, how this genesis formed. And Darin, I'm going to go back to you because you brought up an incident that is really the precipice for future events, and it really gets no press, and only because it involved the death. It was an assassination of Rabbi Meir Kahane, the founder of the Jewish Defense League. Um, Almost overnight, we get an interesting conundrum. The police basically say it's the work of a lone nut job. But to some within the law enforcement industry, very few, and one fireman in particular, noticed that this wasn't just the act of a lone gunman. And that was when the police went to the house of El Sayed Nosair and found a slew of incriminating documents that were from a number of individuals. Tapes from Omar Abdul Rahman, somebody you brought up, who was a radical cleric out of Egypt. Training manuals that were from an army base in Fort Bragg, and also bomb making manuals. All these incriminating things almost left to give you a hint at what's about to come. And so, Darin, interestingly enough, all of this shows a wider network that either the police were too incompetent to understand, or that it leads open to the door of conspiracy and say, well, there's a bigger network because the government wants them involved. But when we find out the players involved with, say, the event that you brought up, the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, the individuals involved with that had prior training, indirect training, through a CIA operation called Operation Cyclone, which was to give money and training, military training, through the Pakistan ISI to defeat the Soviets in Afghanistan. So when the war was over, a lot of these people went back to their home countries. And so you have individuals like Mahmoud Abalima or Mohammed Saleh, Ali Muhammad, who's going to have a big role in the early formation of these terror cells. And all of this is basically an after effect of the CIA's operation, whether you want to say it was manufactured or not. But we are seeing a bigger network of terrorist groups that are either known to the intelligence agencies, foreign and domestic, or they really were incompetent. Is it a mixture of both, or is it really due to malfeasance or intentionality? What would be your thoughts on that, Darin?
Wow, that's a good question. I think it's a combination of both. I don't. My belief is I don't blame the government 100% for the events of 93 or 9/11. 93 and 9/11 are connected in a very similar way because it's almost like the same players were involved. Okay. The problem I had with the agencies is I felt like, and we can go back to the Bojinka plot where Rudolph Mendoza told the FBI about Hakeem Abdul Murad's confession about hijacking all the 10 or 11 airliners and crashing them into buildings like the World Trade Center, the Statue of Liberty, Transamerica Building, Sears Tower, CIA, FBI headquarters, and even some nuclear power plants, and so on. It Even the FAA even knew about this in '95, as well as the FBI. It didn't seem like anything was really done to heighten security. Because if you look at DJ Thermal Detonator's films, Bojinka Maximum, they go to these airports and the security is horrendous. People just walking through had knives and stuff in their bags. The security there was bad. They got fined thousands of dollars. It, it wasn't how it should have been, knowing what the information we got from Mendoza in '95 about the Bojinka plot. Okay, because if you look at his film, you see there's weapons on board from planes that didn't go off. Because remember the Bojinka plot, 48 hours of terror. So when they came back in 9/13, they they searched planes. They found weapons on board. Like these guys were gonna go and do another wave of attacks.
Right.
Okay, and that stems from the security because a lot of these guys had ramp passes. These guys had access to, uh, the tarmac. They were in places where they weren't supposed to be. And if you look at Ahmed Rassam, who was the Millennium Plot bomber, he told investigators that the whole goal of these terrorists, like Al Qaeda, who they were, is to get jobs at airports, to get familiarized with the airport, cab drivers, because when you're a cab driver, you're driving around, you know what's going on, and it just seems like they never just took that um, as serious as they should, and that's my opinion. Because 9/11 easily could have been prevented. It shoot, even the NSA could have stopped it. They had so much metadata, they probably could have stopped it. No, that's a that's another discussion for another day. Because we can spend hours on the NSA alone. Um, but just not taking those red flags and just really taking them to heart, I guess what you have to say. Because if you go back, and we can go back to Alex Station, everyone knows, most of 9/11 researchers know about Alex Station. And now you had the CIA there. You had Tom Wilshire, Cofer Black was part, Richard Blee, George Tent. All these guys were Michael. It was Michael Shorer's station for the Obama unit. I'm sorry, Obama, Osama bin Laden's unit. But eventually he got, taken off the case there and was sent to the basement. But these guys there knew about known Al Qaeda operatives coming into the United States in January of 2000. Okay, and for them not to share that information with the FBI was it's I guess we can say it's malfeasance, or some people say, well, they let it happen on purpose. I'm not on that side of letting it happen on purpose. 9/11. Um, I feel like they were either trying, and I know me and Adam, we talked about this with flipping them or using them as agents. Kofor Black talked about that. He was mad that they didn't have anybody inside Al Qaeda for that. Um, or it was a turf war. The CIA and FBI didn't get along. They were fighting over this information. They basically said, well, if we tell John O'Neill and the I-49 group there, just go there and like a bunch of cowboys and arrest them, and that blows everything that we've uncovered here. So I think the CIA was holding back. They want to see where this would lead. Just unfortunately, it led to 9/11, and it definitely could have helped the cause of Nawaf Hazmi and Khalid Al-Damar being in San Diego. They would have arrested them or caught them. It definitely probably would have thwarted something of the plot. But with intelligence failures and all this, there were so many red flags that it could have been stopped. Because now we can go back to Ken Williams in the Phoenix memo, where they were doing aeronautical training out there in Phoenix, Arizona. We can go back to Harry Samet with Zacharias Moussaoui from Oklahoma to Minnesota, and how they just couldn't get a simple FISA warrant to search his laptop. There were so many opportunities to stop something of the plot, or definitely stop it altogether. And I'm under the impression where I don't think our government wanted it to happen. I honestly, I think they were just beat. And I mean by that is, a lot of people say, oh, they can't beat our defense systems and all this and that. These guys are not dumb. These are pretty smart individuals that, the United States was dealing with. And, I just don't see that happening where we allowed it to happen so we can go into war in Iraq and invade all this, all these countries. I think they knew something was going to happen. They just didn't have time to stop it towards the end, just because they didn't share that intelligence. And I honestly think too is they think that we're the United States. They ain't gonna These guys over there in Afghanistan ain't gonna be able to pull this off. And sure enough, they did. So that's my feeling on the intelligence failures. I could go on more and more, but I definitely think that the United States was just beat that day.
Sure. And, it does bring up an interesting conundrum, Sean, right? If let's go down that road, because the I think what a lot of people miss is that with events like 9/11 or the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, the intelligence services that are involved with the pre-collection of intelligence regarding certain players within those events, it leads back to the ultimate entity, and that is the federal government and the governments of other countries. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about foreign policy, the bigger picture involved. And so, would it be ridiculous, Sean, to entertain the fact that maybe the intelligence services could know about a certain event before it happens, and then make sure that the event takes place in order to capitalize and take advantage of that in order to fulfill certain guidelines? Now, what I'm proposing is something that's not really that outside of the fringe mindsets, if you will. Because when you look at, say, 9/11, right, and you look at the wish for the neoconservative think tanks and groups like Office of Special Plans, for example, that wrote out these directives many years prior, even before the 19 World Trade Center bombing, where they wanted to invade Iraq. I mean, Iraq was blamed for 19th World Trade. You both know this, and Iraq was blamed for initially the 1980 South Africa bombings, and of course 9/11. So, Sean, my question is this: would it be outside the realms of ridiculousness to imply that the intelligence services got information before the event happens, like 9/11, in order for these events to take place, so that they could take advantage of this to fulfill these foreign policy guidelines I talk about? What would be your thoughts on that, Sean?
Well, it's a very old question in 9/11 truth discussion. It's maybe the first question, and there are generally two camps, and I don't believe that even today we, as a 9/11 truth movement, if we can call it that, I don't believe that we've settled on an agreement with this old question, and it's not an easy question to tackle. My thoughts are that generally what you're talking about is let it happen on purpose or made it happen on purpose. And we still aren't sure. I think it's probably a stronger argument if you had to pick one of the two. It's probably a stronger case that this was let it happen on purpose. I think that it's probably not as clean cut as that, to be honest, and to be fair to everyone. The purposeful part of it is maybe incomplete or misleading. I would probably side with kind of a third party option on this, and maybe it's a cop out, but I think instead of LIHOP, instead of MIHOP, it's IHOP. I think it happened on purpose, but I think that the contributing factors are a bit more complex, and just as you alluded to, histories such as Arab nationalism and Islamism, I think that there's some contributing factors which run deep and are very lengthy topics to cover sufficiently. I think that to answer your question directly, it's not so ridiculous to propose the argument, propose the case that there are American intelligence offices or political offices that would seize a opportunity of crisis. Basically the crisis capitalists in the West that would certainly, regardless of whether we're talking about 9/11 or any other subject matter, would seize an opportunity naturally to enact their policy goals. You mentioned the Office of Special Plans, a subject all on its own. There definitely are some threads and some currents which again run deep regarding all of this. But the early 9/11 truth discussion predominantly revolved around a made it happen on purpose type of argument. And I think that's the weaker of those two. If you have only two options, I think that's the weaker of the two. And that is because there appears to be a lot of loose ends. Never mind the loose change, there's a lot of loose ends that are not clean. And it makes it look that if 9/11 is some kind of operation, besides the official story being an Al Qaeda operation, if it's some kind of operation where there are other operatives who have their own motivations and their own interests, if it is some kind of operation, well, it doesn't look super clean. It looks like it's problematic, just like a 1993 World Trade attack. It's not perfect. It's not round on all its edges. And that's why I think if you had to pick one of the two, probably what it looks like most is there was a lie hop or let it happen on purpose situation. But to reiterate, the on purpose part gets very tricky. It's very tricky to keep that, the P in that acronym. It's very tricky to keep that on purpose part in there. But I would probably vote for the third party candidate, and I would say IHOP. It happened on purpose. And I'm not talking about pancake theories.
Right.
Adam, I just want to add something real quick.
Sure.
What Sean said, I agree with basically what he's saying too. I want to point out the fact too is they probably, so you got to think about all the foreign intelligence involved. You got Israeli Mossad, you got Saudi involvement, Pakistani involvement, and so on. Is that they probably knew of this plot because they're following these guys around, okay, from the West Coast to the East Coast, and they might be reporting back to the CIA or whoever. And I think also too we can look at is there could be some type of double crossing involved. Just because we know what George Tenet said about the Israelis, I think Bob Woodward had a book about that. Is they might have been feeding them information like, hey, this is what they're going to be doing, and maybe could have misled them, could have said, hey, this or that, and then it happened, and they knew about it, like foreign intelligence knew about it, and just failed to relay exactly what was going, what day it could have been on, or when exactly when they were going to do it. I just want to point that out too. I think there's possibility of double crossing involved with these foreign intelligence and with the CIA, FBI, whoever you want to, throw some blame on, as well. So yeah, but what I brought back too is when you have all these red flags I brought up with the Phoenix memo, Massawi, you had the Bojinka plot. It can take you down that road where you think, yeah, the government did it. They're 100% behind it because they had all these warnings and failed to recognize them and failed to protect the American public on that day. I'm just in a belief where I think there was some double crossing involved, and these foreign intelligence agencies knew what was going to happen, and the United States, I felt like was double crossed that in that type of scenario.
Right. No, that's a reasonable scenario. And Darin, by the way, I just want to go back to just for a quick second. You talked about an incident with George Tenet. What were you referring to so the audience can know?
I think Sean might know more than me, but I think it's when he was doing some little bit of drinking and he was, I think it was at poolside. Is that right, Sean? He was at a pool.
Yeah, it has to do with an event regarding Tenet was hanging out with Prince Bandar.
Prince Bandar, yeah, who's drinking.
Naturally, the Americans and the Saudis are very friendly, and so basically, it has to do with Tenet's sort of opinions regarding the whole fallout with the post 9/11 era, with the Iraq invasion, with all the bad intelligence that was acted upon egregiously, and the story goes that Tenet had basically finished a bottle of scotch to himself at the pool and was ranting and raving about how the Jews double-crossed him that night. So that's the story about Tenet at Bandar's pool.
And Sean, I mean, Darin, not to forget about you, because you brought up a subject that I have a very strong personal interest in, something that goes back a couple of years now. And it basically is the genesis or the birth, if you will, for the planes operation known as 9/11. And that's the Bojinka bombing plot. Unfortunately, very few people in the 9/11 spectrum know about this event because, you know, when you talk about fringe truthers, and this doesn't make up the percentage or the overall percentage of the actual truth movement, but for the fringe movement, they always refer to 9/11 as the birth, as the afterbirth of Operation Northwoods. And I can understand why they make this distinction, but there's a lot of problems with this. When you look at Bojinka plot and you see it from its whole genesis, including the hidden compartments, it now makes sense that the 9/11 operation was basically from this Bojinka plot. So Darin, you know, this subject I really like. That's how I met DJ Thermal Detonator too, because we talked about Bojinka plot and he was talking about it. And I was blown away by somebody else other than myself that, you know, could talk about this subject in any lengthy period. So Darin, what is the Bojinka plot and how is it so important in regards to explaining that being the genesis of 9/11?
Yeah, the Bojinka plot. If there's something, if you're starting to research 9/11, this is, if you're going to research something, research this along with the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, because again, it's the same type of people involved. Ramzi Youssef did his bombing there in 1983 in February, and then he went to travel to Pakistan, and that's the blueprint of 9/11. Okay, and it's formed by, like I said, the same players: Ramzi Youssef, his I think it was his high school friend Hakeem Abdul Murad.
Yes.
You have his other guys involved. You have Wali Khan Amin Shah. You even have KSM involved. He's there. And then you have some other people on the sides, like his Mohammed Khalifa, who was Osama bin Laden's brother-in-law, who helped with the financing. So what's important to know about the Bojinka plot is it's set in the Philippines. And Ramzi Youssef comes there. He helps train a terrorist group there, Abu Sayyaf. It's a militant group there, and helps train them in some bomb making, terrorist stuff. I think you might agree too that some of the Abu Sayyaf members were involved with the Bojinka plot, with helping plant. Their whole goal was to plant bombs on planes, and I think some members of the Abu Sayyaf were involved in that. So basically, this Bojinka plot comes in different phases. You had the first phase was to actually assassinate Bill Clinton. Right. But they figured that was going to be too tough, so they went to assassinate the Pope. So that was one phase of the plan. The second phase was to go on all these different airliners. I believe there was 11 of them, and set up they have a Timex watch, set these bombs up, put it underneath the seats there on the plane, by the fuel tanker there.
Right.
Yep. And then they I think there was 11 of them, and then what they were going to do is have them blow up. I can't remember how many minutes apart they were going to, each plane going to blow up. I don't know. They had it timed out.
It was 1 minute from each other.
Was it 1 minute from each other?
Yeah, 1 minute from each other.
So, and the whole goal of that was to kill 4,000 people. Was the casualties. So think about 9/11 was 3,000, and this was going to be close to 4,000. And then the third aspect of the plot was to hijack I think it was a Cessna airplane by Hakeem Abdul Murad. He was going to become a martyr, and he was going to crash that Cessna plane at the CIA headquarters. So,
Darin, just to piggyback off of that, it's also implied that there would have been even more attacks on airliners even in the United States, besides just Murad,
Right.
who admitted to his part in it. But it's implied that there were other cells of operatives who would have attacked airliners, even in the United States. So a casualty count in the thousands is absolutely where you would be with it. But I wanted to add a tiny point about that, was that when they were going to assassinate Pope John Paul II in the Philippines that year, in January, when the Pope visited the Philippines, at the time, it was the largest public mass attendance of something like 5 million people were there in the Philippines to see the Pope. He was riding around the Pope mobile and all that.
Right.
So if these terrorists were going to kill the Pope at that gathering, I would say that it's not outside the realm of possibility that they could have killed many other people there as well, because there were so many in close attendance.
Absolutely. And then when they searched the apartment there at room 603, I think it's is it the Doa Josefa apartment? I forget which one it is. Yeah, apartments there. They found robes inside the apartment building, and so they can have somebody as a martyr dress up like they're part of the clergy or something like that to go up to the Pope. They have like a robe like the Pope wears, and then they had like actual like parts where he was traveling, maps to do it. So when they searched his, which I'll get here in a second, they searched his lab or his apartment. They found that as part of the Pope plot. So I thought that was interesting. So and then just going back to one of the Bojinka, they found what happens. Murad and Yusuf were mixing chemicals, and of course they had a big fire. Murad and Yusuf around the building, the apartments, and then Yusuf asked Murad to go back in to retrieve the laptop because all the information they had on there. So went back in there, and that's how Murad got arrested, and that's the key to this, because Murad got arrested, and that's when he got interrogated by the Philippines there with Rudolph Mendoza, and they beat the crap out of this guy. They broke his ribs. They said they told him, man, he can take a beating. He wouldn't, and he wouldn't talk until they actually said this. I thought this was interesting, until they said they're going to hand him over to the Israelis. Right. And that's when he was singing like a bird. So I know Mendoza also offered him, I think it was a Big Mac from McDonald's, because he was so hungry as well. So got to talking, and then as Murad was talking, and I think what Sean brought up, he was talking about there's other operatives of people who are taking flight training in the United States that are good to go right now to do some of these terrorist acts. And another crazy thing too with Murad is he trained in the United States to be a pilot.
Yes, that's right.
He trained in Texas, he trained in North Carolina, and he trained in New York, New Jersey area as well. So he got his pilot's license, and Oklahoma, which is another hotbed for training in terrorist activities. So but then Mendoza, that's how he got to know the other part of the plot of the Bojinka, which was to hijack 11 airliners and crash them into like I said before, the World Trade Center, Sears Tower, CIA, FBI headquarters, and other places of meetings. So so just think if that plot would have went through, the casualties that could have happened, and just the fear of Americans. Imagine what happened with flying. Nobody would have been flying there for a long time.
Yeah, it would paralyze the industry itself. And that was another reason why Khalid Sheikh Mohammed Ramzi Youssef wanted to create this tension of fear and paralyze the American populace in order to hurt the economy as well. 96 is a key year, Sean. We see the intelligence community build two organizations. One was the Bin Laden Issue Station by the CIA under CTC manager David Cohn. And of course, the Defense Intelligence Agency, which was a bigger covert operation called Able Danger, in which I've interviewed two people involved with that operation. So 96 seems to be a key year because intelligence comes in about this mysterious Saudi named Osama bin Laden. The FBI really doesn't know who he is. NSA, CIA, who are monitoring his satellite phone, have a gist about what this guy's all about. God knows what the CIA has on him in the years he's in the Sudan and maybe even into Afghanistan, if we go back that far. But we're starting to hear about this radical fundamentalist unit that grew out of a training camp in Afghanistan, and it's called Al Qaeda. However, at the same time, the FBI, who are generally ignorant regarding this subject because of their insistence that there was a lone a cell in Brooklyn that didn't have extensive tentacles leaching into Afghanistan. And like I said before, the fireman that was involved, Ronald Booker, counterterrorism agent Frank Pellegrino, few people got to just say, wait a minute here, there's a bigger operation at play. And maybe this guy bin Laden is not just some lone millionaire who's funding these operations. He might be behind the creation of such operations. But the problem is not everybody's on the same page, Sean. The CIA, the NSA, the FBI, when they created that bin Laden issue station that involved all these agencies under the direction of the CIA, weren't forthcoming about all their information. So, like I said before, when I interviewed Anthony Schaefer, for example, of Able Danger, he once told me that he said, naively, I believed that everybody was trying to protect America, was sharing information as they got it. But Sean, that wasn't the case. So can you just elaborate for me about what you think is the problem between the agencies themselves regarding not sharing information? Because this could lead open the door to, like I said before, about conspiracy saying, oh, they wanted this to happen, or maybe they did, or maybe they just didn't like the agencies, or maybe there was something more going on. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a big question. Clearly, there are a few factors at play. There's definitely something going on. I wouldn't pin it down to just one thing, but this might be sort of an instance where you could, with a grain of salt, and I think you need to keep your salt shaker handy on all of this, but with a grain of salt, you could maybe look to what the official story purports about 9/11, in that there was a communication breakdown. Exactly the nature of that communication breakdown, you could probably have some debate about. Mm-hmm. But what we can basically prove is that the American security services were not working in effective conjunction. Exactly proving who did what and why gets a little trickier. And I think that's where we have to look at sort of the histories of the agencies, and a lot of it has to do with culture, for lack of a better word, sort of the office culture of these services. There's really so much to discuss about how all of that factors in. This is sort of a component of the LIHOP versus MIHOP debate. For me personally, I kind of cut to the chase, and I'll direct somebody to a 30-second clip of Michael Scheuer explaining how much he didn't like John O'Neill of the FBI. When asked his thoughts on Special Agent John O'Neill of the FBI, Michael Scheuer had nothing nice to say about the man. And Scheuer was, of course, head of the bin Laden station at one point, before being pushed out because he was difficult to work with. And I don't doubt that. But for Scheuer to very publicly and very calmly, watch the expression in his face when he says it, for him to make an announcement of his own accord, because he adds it as an addendum after answering some questions about his thoughts. He says something to the effect of, the only good thing that happened 11 September was that the building fell on him being John O'Neill. So I think that can illustrate very quickly, 30 seconds, that illustrates very quickly the wall. The wall is the communication breakdown. that's discussed by the joint inquiries and commissions after 9/11 about how the services were not working congruently. There's probably a historical investigation that we could look at the culture of the offices and how they view their own assignments and how they view the big picture. Maybe there was a competition sort of between the offices about who gets the credit for achieving what goal, because certainly everybody is going to want to bring in the prize, and maybe offices like CIA did not want to share credit with offices like FBI. I dare say that people working at CIA may have felt superior or better than FBI. Maybe they think that they're just better and smarter than them, and they could be worried that FBI is going to tough it up, and they don't want them to be involved because they could get in the way. But because we know about the types of things that CIA and FBI, I'm not letting them off the hook entirely either. The types of things that CIA has done in the past, you got to grab that salt shaker again. But specifically, your point was about the year 1996. And 96 is important because that's Clinton administration. There's an entire series of discussions about the Clinton administration. And it was at that time, according to Scheuer, keep your salt shaker on hand, according to Scheuer, that in 1996, the United States, and basically this is because Bill Clinton leads the nation at the time, passed up at least 10 opportunities to just get rid of bin Laden. And that involves using the United States military or United States intelligence services. The options were on the table pretty well constantly to take someone like an Osama bin Laden out of the picture entirely. And none of these opportunities were acted upon. Scheuer, to his credit, felt very upset about all of that. And again, according to Scheuer, the United States intelligence apparatuses, by a year like 1996, they had more information on Al-Qaeda than any terrorist group ever. And because other terrorist groups have already been brought up in this conversation, Abu Sayyaf, Abu Nidal, PFLP, etc., for that to be fact, that's tremendous. For Al-Qaeda to have been the group that they had the most information on of any terror group ever, I think that is one of those answers to a question that really raises more questions, but that's truly what we deal with on a daily basis. So I'm not sure if that truly answers your question, Adam, but those are my thoughts.
No, I thought you did a good job there, and that's a lot of lifting, as you said, regarding the question being so broad. So, Darin, I'm going to ask you to put in your share of heavy lifting with the next question about 9/11. Now, I'm not going to bore the both of you because you're more than well-read on the subject of 9/11. And I already asked these questions to previous people on the show. So let me ask a question of you, Darin, that you have covered. And it's something that is, I think, it was brought to my attention by none other than our fearless leader, DJ Thermodetonator, Nelson Martins. And I know of only one other person in my experience that has ever covered this, and that was Paul Thompson, who I consider the leading researcher in 9/11 I've ever met. And that is the additional hijackings that were going to happen and the extra Arab fundamentalists that we don't know much about, because when we detained them, when we lifted the airline ban on September 13th, 14th, we deported these people because they overstayed their visas or had visa violations prior to it. And I want you to give us your thoughts about this anomaly of 9/11. I made a podcast previous, and my initial started to the Darkened Hour, and it was about United Airlines Flight 23, whom you both know about, that plane that was going to take off on September 11th, and basically had three Arabs yelling about not, wanting to fly because the plane went back, because the CEO, Gerald Harvey of United Airlines, who's a hero in my book, basically ordered the very first stand down, but it was a stand down for United Airlines, not the airline industry. So, Darin, can you talk about the additional hijackings, or the additional attempted hijackings, or of these Arabs? I think it was about 50 people that were arrested and detained. Is that right, Darin? Just get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely around there. Yeah, we always talk about 9/11 being the blueprint from the Bojinka plot, and Bojinka plot is known for 48 hours of terror.
That's right.
Okay, so you have 9/11, and then when 9/13, when they reopened the airports there, um, yeah, they came back. There's DJ Thermodetonator does a fabulous job of showing that in his films, from Bojinka Maximum to the inside job at the Boston local airport as well. Yeah, they came back, and there's DJ Thermal Detonator does a good job of showing what flights were targeted. We know about Flight 23, where there was three men on there who were restless and getting pretty rowdy about why they're not taking off. And then when they brought the authorities on board, they were able to, before they got on, they took off and they left all their stuff there. And so that's definitely one to look at. You had Flight 163 was another one, where there was possible hijackings reported on 163. Flight 43 was another one where it had mechanical failure. What wasn't able to take off was another flight that was targeted for a hijacking. Delta 1989, which gets confused a lot with Flight 93 because they were like on that same path where they entered getting up and down on their cell phones when they weren't supposed to be. So there's a lot of information regarding, September 13th that needs to be heeded, because it's so important to know. As they came back, they weren't scared because they had operatives in these airports. Ahmed Rassam, the Millennium plot bomber, said this. They had guys in the airports. They had guys, and working as, they could, who knows what they were working in. They could have been doing maintenance. They could have been doing janitor. Who knows? They found these weapons on these planes, knives. They box cut. They found all this stuff on these planes that were being targeted. I know. I don't know if it was Flight 163, but there was another one where they had like 30 U.S. Marines on the flight,
Yes.
and I think it might be 163. I could be wrong, but there was a flight where they had 30 U.S. Marines on there where they interviewed passengers saying there was some suspicious activity going on there, and they saw the 30 Marines, and they're like, "I forget this." So, and DJ Thermal Detonator does a good job of pointing out to us a lot of these guys who are going to do these hijackings. Other operatives didn't show up. Some could have chickened out. Some maybe just weren't able to make it. The official story says 4 planes, and that's why I disagree with the official story. Now, the official story is not 100% wrong; it's just incomplete, because it's not giving you everything. There's cover up there from the FBI, and my reasoning is why they covered up is because this was going to be a bigger operation, and then what people think. And if you just go back and research Bojinka, and they're taking that blueprint, there definitely was. And I think by covering that up, that maybe shows, like the American public, like, oh, don't be so scared. We got them now. Don't have to worry about it no more. When actuality, there could have been 10, 12 planes used that day or even more. We don't know, because you got to think about all the targets. They wanted to do the Sears Tower has always been a target. Mark Bingham Oh, no, I'm sorry, not Mark Bingham, but I think it's Peter Hansen on Flight 175 talked about this dad that they wanted to hit Chicago. Um, Transamerica Building's always been a target in San Francisco. It was a target during the Millennium Plot. And then you talk about the White House, U.S. Capitol has always been a target. KSM's always talked about the Capitol building as a target. So you have all this stuff going on that's not being reported, but DJ Thermodaner does a phenomenal job of accessing all these articles and archives he puts out. And the film is free. It's a long film, but it's definitely worth the watch because of all the information it brings of what absolutely could have happened 9/11. Not just the four planes, or we could have been talking about 12, 15.
Just to also add to that, Darin, Bob Graham, who's the co-chair of the Joint House Inquiry that investigated the intelligence services and the history of pre-intelligence 9/11, basically did say that he knew that there were additional hijackings that were going to take place. And this was from closed door sessions from members of the CIA and intelligence community as well. So I mean, I could spend another hour talking to you about the anomalies of 9/11. I won't do that. But I do want to finalize it here around so much work. I mean, between the both of you separately, and even when you get together, we talked about this before I pressed record. You're working on a number of projects, Darin. You are. Sean, you're working on the podcast. You got other projects going on. But the both of you also have something else going on. You have daily lives. Now, I'll ask Sean first and Darin, because if you're going to try and entice the public to get into 9/11 and they see the enormity of it and that they have their own family going on, they have their own daily lives. What would you say, Sean, for example? What would you say to them regarding where you would start off first, or how would you go about getting an interest into 9/11 in a deeper dive? And also, Sean, at the same time, how does this affect your daily life? Does family, friends, associates, do they know what you're doing, and are they supportive of what you're doing? And just talk on that for a bit.
Well, I try to talk to people that I encounter who maybe express some concern about the United States economy or United States foreign policy. Anyone who maybe is anti-war or anti-corruption. Folks who have any number of concerns about the United States government. We're all Americans here, and so that's the government that we have inherited. And if folks have questions about something that happens overseas, it could be anything in current events. Right now everyone's talking about Russia. There's plenty of opportunity to get into a discussion about United States policy and foreign affairs by large. And I'm always happy to talk to people, especially if I encounter them day to day. We all are humans and we have lives and we have to do what it takes to survive. And so I try to balance things and be able to move forward in my daily life and also make some time to outreach to people, for anyone who wants to listen or have a discussion. If someone says, hey, I saw this great thing, loose change, and did you know a third building fell? And then at that point, I'll tell them, okay, that's it's very interesting. Did you know about the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and how the mastermind of that attack formulated a plan that looks remarkably like 9/11 in a couple of years later called Bojinka, and talk about the expanding nature of all of these intertwining topics. if someone has a question or a comment about maybe the Twin Towers or there's any number of these pretext terrorism topics. There are many that I'm always happy to get into with people and have a conversation and a discourse and share ideas. There's so many topics to cover that really, depending on the day and depending on the person who I encounter, I'll choose different topics to share with people. It was just recently that I had a great conversation with someone about basically their interests in 9/11 conspiracy theories and how Building 7 was a mysterious anomaly to them. And I told them about urban moving systems, which they'd never heard of. And, their eyes were wide like dish plates. It was very good. I'm always happy to have these discussions with folks. It's an expanding topic, which, Adam, you've said many, many times on your channel. There's a branching out effect, but we're able to bring it back to some major keystones on all of this. And I think culture is a huge component about it, about how we as Americans see ourselves in the world and how we view our actions and how the rest of the world from the other side views what Americans do. And so 9/11 was very shocking for Americans and the world, but it wouldn't surprise me if there were people, not just spooks in the intelligence services, that thought something like that could and would happen. And so it's not just a problem of criminality or criminal action, but I think there's a very large overreaching and encompassing cultural issue, which we are trying to work with and bring to light and maybe improve. And so I'm always happy to have these types of conversations. I don't always have the answer to the question, but I think it's very good that we're asking these questions and that we're communicating with each other.
And Darin, is that a similar experience to you? Are you when you work on these projects? How does it affect your daily life, and is your family supportive of what you do?
Yeah, I mean, my wife doesn't. She doesn't care. um, she sees my table full of books and
Yeah.
laptop, everything, notes I got written down. So she doesn't care. She knows I enjoy it. So it's better than going out to the bar and getting drunk or something, with friends. No, but yeah, same like Sean. 9/11 is not summed up in 5 minutes. It's years and years and years of research. It's so expansive. You got so much involved, from foreign intelligence, domestic intelligence, Arab terrorism, why they did it. Just the players involved. There's just so much stuff, and don't think you're gonna master it in like a year or so, because I mean, you've been doing it longer than I have. I learn stuff new every day, like you say.
Yeah.
So it's very expansive. I enjoy talking to people about it. We got to have a certain common denominator though, because you got to be able to believe in planes and hijackers. It's just you got to start there. If we're going to talk about 9/11 and we're still talking about there was no planes or holograms or there were fake people on the plane or phone calls were fake, I just can't have that discussion with you. I just don't have time for that. But if we can get like in a common denominator, like airplanes and hijackers, uh, talk about the intelligence agencies. That's something we can get going. Even if you think Israel did 9/11, that's fine. We can still talk about it, and go from there. As we can talk about other, like with with Saudi intelligence, Pakistani intelligence, CIA, and we can talk about all those things. So I do enjoy talking to people. I really do. I just love to get more people on board. There's the truth movement's been poisoned, and it's been poisoned for years, with all the fanatical conspiracies out there. As we mentioned before, I'm not going to name them all, or the people who did it, you know, who are responsible for them. But just finding the truth. I mean, I think we all know that we're not getting the full truth from 9/11, you know, and these families deserve closure. Um, I couldn't imagine, losing a family member that day, jumping off those buildings or burning to death. Um, I just can't imagine the pain they were going through, knowing that their loved ones weren't coming home after they left for work on Tuesday morning to probably kiss them goodbye. I'll see you later for dinner, and next thing you know, sure, finding the truth, do as much research as we can. And I just feel like we do a disservice to families if we start entertaining those kooky conspiracy theories out there. Because I just put myself in their shoes. If that was my dad or my wife or my brother that died, um, I don't want to know about, oh, there was no planes. They were taken somewhere and killed off, or whatever stupid thing they're saying. So yeah, 9/11 is very important to me. The stuff before 9/11 is very important to me, but even the aftermath, because 9/11 still, the event is still causing issues this day.
Yes.
We're still over there in the Middle East. We still have, it seems like we got troops everywhere surrounding, policing the world. And here in the United States, we have veterans who commit suicide 23 a day, and we got homeless people, we got food issues. It's like we've got all these issues here, but yet we're policing the world over there in the Middle East. So we need to scale back from that and focus on what's here. And that's just my opinion of it. But like I said, with 9/11, I feel like it's still an open case. Um, we only got a little bit from what the government told us. I think there's a lot more of what happened that day, and just continue research and trying to find the truth for it.
Yeah, it's very well said. And because I'm similar minded thinking, whereas and I sound like a broken record at this point. Forgive me, I'm 53. So we have a war on two fronts, and there's a war against disinformation and a war for information that we're trying to get from
Sure.
the government itself. And in between are people like yourself. And you're not, because you wouldn't say you're a fringe conspiracy theorist or somebody who just straight and narrow, the government told the truth, there's no conspiracy. We're in between, and there's not many of us. It's unfortunate. And that's, I think,
Right.
whether you want to say it's intentional or not, they spread the disinformation and whatnot. I'm not going to call people like, I'm going to say a name, like Barbara Honegger, an agent. I think she's an unwitting influence in poisoning the well, so to speak, which helps the government by propositioning, like you said, Darin, no planes or no hijackers and all these other scenarios that in the end hurt the very movement that they belong to. But
Mm-hmm.
I want to wrap it up here, and I want to get Sean. You've been working on a new podcast with Darin, the both of you, and I was so excited when you finally released the first episode. Like I said before I press record, I've always believed in the both of you, and I really am proud of the both of you for the strides that you made, for the work that you've done, and you put in a lot of work. And I want you to come on the show and to talk about, this subject that we talk about today, and also to get you the attention that you deserve, because what we want in the end is to have a bigger educated movement that we can actually try to change things, as you said, Darin, about holding people accountable. And so, I do want to say on the air, I'm very proud of the both of you. You made big strides, and you've really have gone over and beyond, and defeated the inner, the previous held beliefs, because now you're entering in the world of knowledge. and with knowledge comes responsibility. And you took it on yourselves to make that step, and it's a bold step. And I want to thank you both very much for making that step. All right, Sean, where can people find you? And talk about the podcast and what direction you want to go in. And Darin, you answer those questions after he's done.
Well, Adam, thank you again for the kind words. I'm on Twitter and YouTube. People can find me there. I just use my real name. I don't have an interesting title for my channels, unfortunately. My Twitter handle is SKRussellAK, and I'm happy to connect with people. Basically, I think I speak for Darin as well as myself that we've been developing our capabilities and trying to network with other like-minded people about all of this. And Darin and I had the idea to start collaborating on some things quite a while ago, and we've been working towards that goal to make that a reality. I also do article editing and contributing writing and research for DJ Thermal Detonator Nelson Martins of Truther TV and 9/11 Truth vs. Skeptics. And we have some projects which I think will be very exciting coming out from that. I try to post information on my social media feeds and on my channels. If I ever find something that I think is pertinent or interesting, I'm always trying to share it with people and basically to help educate. I'm always learning myself, but I think that when we all work together in these endeavors, we create a better culture. And again, I think that's really, never mind the crimes of 9/11, I think what we have is a very deep and problematic cultural issue. And so to change that culture, we have to change the media. And so that's why we're contributing to maybe tip the scales, so to speak, and balance the media so that there's better information and more of it to influence and educate and make better informed public. And then the public can make better informed action and decisions and maybe turn the ship around.
Darin?
Yeah, same thing as Sean. The podcast, Beyond Ground Zero. I'm so happy that we're doing it. I know we talked about it for probably over a year about getting to it. But we finally were able to get together and get the first episode out, which I thought was a success, about the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Episode 2 should be coming out very soon. We're going to talk about the Bojinka plot. So I'm excited about that. I'm mostly on Twitter. It's at Harvey Darin 26. So that's where I usually talk about 9/11 and stuff. I do talk about sports too. I'm a big Michigan fan, so you might see me posting some Michigan football stuff. So big Michigan fan. Yeah, and then I got some articles on, like Sean pointed out, on TJ Thermal Detonator's blog, 9/11 Skeptics vs. Truth. I got 3 articles there about the Millennium Plot, the 1997 subway bombings in Brooklyn, and I did a film article on his film review of 1993 World Trade Center bombing. So I got more projects with DJ Thermal Detonator I'm working on right now. I just went on his Patreon. We did a book review about the prison system and terrorism in there. So that was fun. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the podcast. Hopefully once a month we'll get a episode out for you guys. But that's the goal. But yeah, it's staying busy for sure.
Darin Harvey, Sean Russell, the podcast is Beyond Ground Zero. Thank you both very much for coming on today.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Adam.